Hey good people, today I'm making this video that I promised about, specifically about the web context for Year 12 digital solutions for IA2 and IA3. Now I'll just bring up the syllabus here. If I go to the marking guide for IA2, I'm specifically talking about this section here, generate user interfaces and program components of the digital solution. So recently, I mentioned this online in a chat group. Recently, I took over a Year 12 class that were doing the web context. Now, I hadn't previously used the web context. I was building desktop applications using interactive media context. But when I came across this, I think I addressed a lot of issues that people were having in the web context. And so I created a template for students to use to get them up and running and offered this up to the teaching community and, well, anyone else who finds it useful for whatever reason. So that's what I'm going through today. So I'm going to show you a nice, quick and easy way to get up and running to generate user interfaces and program components for digital solutions if you're in the web context. Okay, so I'll just close that window for a second. Now I'm going to use VS Codium. So most of you probably know of Visual Studio Code. That's fine. You could do exactly the same thing with VS Code. It is the same code base. The only reason I use VS Codium is because it's rebuilt from the open source code without the telemetry. So it is Visual Studio Code, but it doesn't phone home to Microsoft. So if you're like me and you like having your code only do the things you want it to do, then that's an option. But as I said, you can use Visual Studio Code just as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my browser now, and I'm going to go to GitLab Tuxter. So if you go to GitLab Tuxter and go to personal projects, you'll find the two that we're talking about here. So I've made the code available. So you got IA2 web context template and IA3 web context template, and that's what I'm going through today. So I'm going to click on IA2 web context template, and I'm going to go over here to the clone. You could, in fact, actually we might do it this way instead. I was going to clone it, but I'll just go here and download the zip of it. Okay, I'm going to pop that into my code projects, save that there, and then I'm going to go to that folder and I'm just going to extract that. So it doesn't matter what platform you're on, it'll be the same process. I've got a couple other projects here that I'm just currently working on this machine. But I'll go into this one, and there we go. We actually have the project now. So I'm going to get rid of that window, and I'm going to go into VS Codium, or in your case, maybe Visual Studio Code, or any other editor. It actually doesn't matter. You can use any editor you like. But if you want to follow along, this will be the closest one. So I'm going to go ahead and open a folder, and I'm going to go to Code Projects and IA2 Web Context Main. I'm going to open that. Okay, so now we've got our folders here. You can see our main. I'll come back and explain a little bit of this in a moment. But this won't actually run at this point. So if I open up a new terminal and type Python main, you'll see I get an error that I don't have the Flask libraries. So this template, I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, is based on Flask. So that way we can use Python, and we can use it in quite an easy way. All right, so what we want to do is, if you have a look, there's a file here called requirements.txt, and that is by convention in Python a file you put in with all the requirements, because it makes it super simple to install it, because all I have to do is go pip install -r requirements.txt. It doesn't matter how many requirements are there, that will go ahead and install them. Okay, so because I'd installed them before, just to show you, it didn't have to go ahead and download it. Normally you'd see like a loading bar here. So it's I've already got Flask, Flask WTF and WT forms, and they're now all installed. So if I now go Python main, you'll see that it's actually running. Okay, so if I control and click that, you'll see I've got the program actually up and running. So I'm just going to hold control and press C just to end that. Now, you might have to do your command slightly different to what I just did with pip. So maybe pip isn't in your path. Maybe you've installed, usually this is on Windows, that it's not in the path, you might have something more that looks like this. Python exe -m for module, then pip install, and you might want to put the user flag on there. Usually with students who don't have permission to install things, that will just put it all in their home directory in places that they typically have all permissions to. So it will just be for that user. So you might need to run a command like that. But that'll give us everything we need. Now I'll go ahead and run this again and just show you the program. So it says it's running on localhost at port 8080. So if I just hold Control and click on that, it's going to open it in a browser. So this is the app that's just running. So it's generic. It's just a default app. It has awesome Flask app as a title, little tagline there, a great way to start the day. But it's got some stuff already built in that will make it easier for the students to get up and running. So you can see here there's a login. So I've only got one or two links that just go back to the login page. I can't go anywhere else from here. So if I go ahead and put in a user, I think the password was secure password. Yep, it was secure password. Okay, and I'm now in. So you can see once I've logged in, I've got some more menu items. So I can search for a user, add a user. I can log out, then I won't have access to those things again. And just to prove that, if I go here, you can see I've got this URL up here, user search. Now I'm going to copy that and then I'm going to log out. So if I log out and I try going to that URL, you can see it just redirects me straight back to the login again. So I'm just going to log back in with my secure password. That's better, that worked. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the basic functionality that's already here. Obviously I've got a menu. If I, this is just the drop page, change this to whatever. It's just shortcuts, but if I go to search user, let's look for Harry Smith. Okay, you can see it came up with Harry and Mary because of the way I'm doing the query. I'll show you that. It's a bit of a fuzzy search, as in if it matches anything like that, it'll show up. So Harry and Mary both show up. I could add a user by filling out the form. If I put Jerry in here and go to submit, it'll tell me, I need to fill in this field and so on. So it's got some nice features built in, and I'll log out again. So that's the basic rundown. Oh, actually, there's one more thing I'll show you before I go out of that. Is you've also got search, sort, stored data and add data. They are just blank pages. They're just placeholders at the moment to give you an idea of how to start out. So this is working code, and this is a placeholder to show you, what files you'd need when you start to build something. Okay, so it's got login, logout, it's got page navigation, and it's got forms that you can input into, and you can do a search. So it's got a lot of the functionality that you need. Then they would have to obviously build it out to their specific project. So I'll close that. I'm just going to stop that server for the moment. Okay, so let's have a quick look through what's going on here. I've got a couple of folders here. I've got a data store, and we're using an SQLite file. So I'm not going to try and open that. I could open that with SQLite browser or something like that. So I've got a data store folder. I've got my forms. So these are the forms that I use. So if I need to input data, for instance, login details, that's where my forms go. And my static file is any CSS or JavaScript that I use for the page. And my templates are my different pages. Okay, so I'm going to go through that a little bit more in a moment. But basically what I want to point out is, I suppose the biggest benefit of using this template for a web context is it really simplifies things. You saw that I just installed the dependencies, and then I could just run it. Notice I didn't have to have a separate web server running. I didn't have to have a separate database server running to connect to it. It's all packaged up in this one nice, neat little project right here. So once you got Python, a couple of libraries in, you can just go ahead and run it. So how did we do that? If I go into the main here, down the bottom, we've simply been able to use Flask's built-in server. So our app, we're going to run our own server, and we're going to set debug to true, because that'll give us information if we have any issues. If we got bugs in our code, it'll actually give us some useful error messages that we need. Okay, so that allows us to simply run this main file and everything just works, which makes it really, really simple. A lot of the online stuff you'll see with Flask tells you to use something like SQL Alchemy, which is an ORM, an object relational mapper. So you don't use SQL directly. Now, of course, our requirements for Digital Solutions, IA2, is that we do in fact use SQL. So I've made this template so it actually uses a local SQLite file. And we use the built-in SQLite driver that's built into Python so that we can write SQL and read and write from that file. So there's no need to have a database server running, and there's no need to have a web server running like Apache or Nginx or something similar. So it's all built in. So that's a real strength of this. Now, back to these templates. It's we've got a base HTML here, which I've put together, and that just provides us with a navigation bar and allows us to put our body of text into here. So you would edit this to change the look of the whole page. So if you want to edit the CSS, or in fact, if you look in your static files here and we look in the CSS, you'll see I've got Bootstrap. So if you want to just use the Bootstrap classes, you can certainly go ahead and do that. So if I go back to the base here, I am actually using Bootstrap classes throughout. Okay, so if you want to use Bootstrap, that's all there, built in and ready to go. I've actually downloaded the Bootstrap CSS. I haven't referred to it online because, again, the strength of this is that a student should be able to unpack it onto their computer and code on it and use it wherever and whenever they like. So they don't actually have to have an internet connection. So if I referred to the resources for Bootstrap, then you'd need to have an active internet connection for that to work. So instead, that's all built in, it's downloaded. Now, in my template, I don't use jQuery at all, but I've included it because I know some people do like to use elements out of jQuery. So that's all there as well, and all available offline. So once we have our base, we can then go to a page such as the login, and we can say this will be the body, this section here, by using these tags. What's between these tags will get inserted into here, and that's then our page. So we're using this templating system to embed sections into a page, so you don't have to rewrite all this for every page. You write that once, you change some design, and it will change your entire site look and feel. So we can build any of these templates for any page that we want. So we've got an index page, we've got a login page. So that's what our login page looks like. I won't go into all the details with the forms in this video. They're very easy, but there's lots of information online. So if you just look up Flask and forms, you'll be able to understand what's going on here. Okay, so back in our main, you can see for a page, all we need to do is define a route and how we're going to do it. So logout, for example, is a nice easy one. We've got these function decorators. Now again, just look at Flask documentation, all the tutorials online. This isn't really a Flask tutorial, it's just to show you the template. So we've got our session variables, so I'm going to pop that. That's what stops us from being able to see all those other pages and menu items and such when we're not logged in. And then we're going to redirect to another page. So that's what happens when you call logout. Okay, so if we click that logout link, it will take us to our local host, port 8080 /logout, and then that will redirect us back into the login. So whenever we want to add a page, we simply add our route, tell it what our route is, and then we have our function that will do whatever we need to do. So this one checks that we've got this session variable, the user token, which I've just popped in there, but you probably want to do that programmatically at some point. or not. You know, this is a prototype. It doesn't have to be, you know, commercial grade coding. We can hard code some things like that as long as they understand what's happening with the sessions there. Yeah, and that's really it. That's all the pages. So for them to create a new one, let's say they wanted to create a new page, they could just say app route, and it'll be some page. That'll be their new page. Define that function, and then we can go ahead and handle that page however we want. So we've just created that new route. Okay, and I've also got a built-in error handler. So if somebody goes to a page that doesn't exist, then we'll just say not found. So that's another template that we have. Okay, so it really is that easy to just add a page. As I said, it's not a Flask tutorial. So if you want to know how these different parts work, like the redirect or the render template, that's Flask specific. It's pretty easy to look up and learn about. But this template will just give you a running start. Once you understand some basics of Flask, it has the built-in database. So actually, if I just open up SQLite browser or DB browser, and I'll just go ahead and go into the data store, open up that database, browse the data. So you can see under auth, I've got one here, Harry, has got a secure password. Now that's stored in plain text, so there's some probably people jumping out of their chair right now going, you should never store passwords in plain text, and absolutely you should not. It should be a hashed value. I don't start with a hash value because it's part of the learning process. So we give students this template and say, well, what's wrong with doing this? Would you want somebody to store your passwords in plain text in a database like that can be breached? So they can then go ahead and change that to a hash if they wanted to. I've got a user table, bunch of users and their ages. That's it. That's as simple as it is because it's just a template. They can add tables, they can add their own data, figure out what their own SQL is, and if we go into the data store, our database controller here, this simply connects to our database and closes it when we've finished using it, and this is where you put your SQL. Okay, so you can see I'm using the like keyword. So as I said, it's a bit of a fuzzy search. It searches for anything that's like that. And this one, add the user, we're actually inserting the user. Now notice also that I'm using prepared statements. That's again a good thing for students to learn, that you never put strings straight into your SQL because then you're vulnerable to the SQL injection attack. So that's another thing that you can talk to students about. So we use prepared statements always. So we prepare the statement that will take care of escaping out any dangerous characters and so on, so you can't get SQL injections, and it puts the appropriate variables into the right spot, and then you commit that into the database. That's checking the authorized user. So yeah, that's it. You just put all your SQL into this into this DB controller, that connects to our SQLite database. So that's all there built. You just change these functions, add new functions, and that's your database side of things taken care of. You want to create the look and feel of the page, then that goes into your templates, which can inherit from each other. You got your CSS and JavaScript stored there, and any forms, input forms you want to use. Now that's really useful using the Flask forms. Why do you want to do that? Because it's got built-in help. So it's got automatic checking of variables and so on. For instance, we've got validators here that say this field is required. So that gives the client side functionality as well. So when you go to press submit and surname hasn't got any information in it, well, the validator said it was required, so it'll give them a warning before it even sends a request to the server. So that's done on the client side, simply by just creating a Flask form. Okay, well, I hope that's a nice little overview for you on how you can use that for IA2. Now, I'm going to have a real quick look at IA3, but I'll do that in a separate video, because with IA3, we want to take our web context, and I'm going to use it and show you how to connect to our API. So our API is an API that you can customize. I've made videos about that before. If you're interested in those, please go check out my Our API videos, where a teacher can very quickly and easily create a custom API that you know is going to be there because you've created it, and you give it to the students and they run it locally. So again, no internet required. We can do full web context without any internet at all, other than installing the initial tools, installing VS Codium or Visual Studio Code, and installing those 3 library dependencies. Other than that, you can do everything offline, okay, including IA3, where you're talking across internet protocols. Okay, so I'll do that in a separate video, and I'll link to that as well.